Coffee Conversations with Greg J is on. This is where we have culturally relevant conversations, casual but compelling, about a variety of topics from a decidedly global perspective. Haven't had an opportunity to chop it up with y'all in a minute here. I think the last time we came together, the elections were in full swing. And if you go back on our YouTube channel, and please like and subscribe, just go find it, Hannibal the Radio, and you'll see the playlist is Coffee Conversations with Greg J. But, you can find me on YouTube. Our podcasts are available wherever you get your audio podcasts, because we do repurpose this broadcast audio wise and put it out as a podcast. So Apple, Spreaker, iHeart, wherever you want to go, we're there. Coffee Conversations with Greg J. But if you remember our previous episodes, we were examining various portions of the electoral season. One of those was we were speaking about reparations, and we witnessed a kind of a meltdown in communication among our political leaders out there who were championing a unprecedented examination of reparations to Black descendants of slaves here in America. It was confounding to me that the politicians put in all that work, and then whatever happened, they were supposed to go to vote, and the votes were removed, and the senator that was leading the charge was saying he didn't know what happened, and I mean, it was just a lot of stuff happening. So now we're couple that activity in the state, and now it's going to be about President-elect Trump. It's a lot of changes happening in politics post-election. A lot of people are licking their wounds, if you were, or contemplating deeply what is next. Where do we go from here? And that's today's central theme. Where do we go from here? And we want to focus that philosophical question on the issue of reparations, and particularly reparations in California. So today, have one of the legal minds of the century, of the day. The sister is look, you see all of these Black women, what do you call them? Adjudicators, legislators, counselors, attorneys, doing big things across the board. Every state almost, you see the sisters, and the sisterhood is active in these legal spaces. Even up there at Supreme Court, sisterhood is doing the thing. So I'm just proud to have just met our sister here that I'm bringing on today, Kamillah Moore. Got her coffee or tea, chopping it up with Brother Greg. Good morning. How are you today?
Good morning, Brother Greg. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Just listen, Sister Kamillah, I'm just trying to contemplate the situation out here, as an everyman, right? Went to the polls. I watched and I trusted my elected officials. I know there was a lot of work on the community activist space and reparations, see how this thing is going to go. And it was groundbreaking. Mm-hmm. Then all of a sudden, okay, what happened?
So that's a great question. And we're a couple months out, right? And there's still a lot of questions the community has in terms of, what happened on August 31st, 2024, which was the last day where the state legislature could pass bills during that legislative session. And so also Senator Stephen Bradford, that was his last legislative session because he was termed out of the state legislature after serving for over 12 years. And so I mentioned him because he was the bill author of, two pieces of legislation that had a lot of community support. One of them was SB 1403, which would have created a new state agency. Think about, a state reparations office to administer reparations programs, policies, things like that. And then he had another bill, SB 1331, which would have created a reparations fund, a state fund, a new account in the state treasury to fund those reparations policies and programs on behalf of descendants of slaves. And then also he had another bill, SB 1050, which was like a land reclamation bill, which would have allowed for Black families who had their land taken via unjust property takings, racially motivated eminent domain. That bill would have given them an avenue, as it was also connected to the state agency bill, to get repair, to get their land back. And so just to make a really long story short, when the legislative session initially started, which was, 6-7 months prior to August 31st, 2024, most of the California Legislative Black Caucus members actually did not sign on to support Bradford's bills, in part because he introduced those bills individually on his own. And, to be quite honest, the caucus didn't appreciate that. They wanted more consensus, and they wanted to, they wanted more consensus. And so because he introduced those bills that I mentioned on his own, primarily the agency bill and the fund bill, initially the caucus didn't support them, even though the bills itself, as they were written, are really good bills, transformative bills. 6 months into the legislative session, prior to August 31st, 2024, around May, June-ish of this past year, they had a change of heart. They talked it out, and they actually supported at least the agency bill. And they actually asked for $6 million from the governor to fund that bill. Now, what happened between June 2024, when they actually said, okay, we support this agency bill, to August 31st, 2024, where the last day of legislative session, they pretty much reneged on their commitment to bring the agency bill to the floor for a final vote in the state assembly. Apparently, what we've learned since August 31st, 2024, is that the caucus met internally that last week of the legislative session, and they had a vote. The vote was, will we bring this state reparations agency bill to the assembly floor for a final vote? That would have been the last step before it would have went to the governor's office for him to sign. And they voted 11-1. So all 11 caucus members voted to not bring the bill to the floor, and only Senator Bradford voted to bring the bill to the floor. And so that's why, the agency bill wasn't brought to the floor. The reparations fund bill wasn't brought to the floor. And the land reclamation bill, the Black Caucus ended up supporting that bill. And so they brought that bill to the floor for a final vote. And it went to Governor Newsom's office to sign. However, Governor Newsom vetoed that land reclamation bill. And in his veto letter, he said he couldn't sign the land reclamation bill because it was tied to the agency bill, which never made it to his desk. I think the last point I'll make before, let's continue to have a conversation. I think it's interesting that in his veto letter, he said he couldn't sign the land reclamation bill because the agency bill never got to his desk. When, learning, post-mortem what happened, he had a hand in the agency bill. And he, meaning Newsom, Governor Newsom, had a hand in the agency bill not getting to his desk, right? He influenced, through internal private conversations, the Black Caucus to not bring this agency bill to his desk. And then maybe we can have a conversation as to why didn't Governor Newsom want to see this agency bill or this reparations fund bill come to his desk.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. All right, so now here we are, and I think, post-election, post-November 5th, everything is in disarray. And I know the Black Caucus now has new leadership. I saw we actually posted some news stories on beachcityradio.com. You guys go on there, beachcityradio.com, and go to the section that says Beach City Perspective, and you see our feed of news stories that come from around the state and indeed around the diaspora. But we know that the California Black Media Network asked Steve Bradford 7 questions, and then outgoing President Lori Wilson some questions. What does she think about the future? And then also asked Isaac Bryan a few questions. So, without getting into what those questions were, just generally speaking, as you observe the situation, You know, are we unified now in this new iteration? Because now I think Black political leadership really needs all hands on deck, right? It's like this is a new situation in front of us, and how are they really amply prepared and unified to address the needs of the Black community in California?
It's a really great question, and yeah, to your point, there's new leadership. Senator Bradford was the vice chair of the caucus. He's termed out, so he's no longer in the legislature. Lori Wilson, Assembly Member Lori Wilson, is still in the legislature, but she's not in the leadership per se of the Black Caucus. And so the new chair and vice chair of the Black Caucus, Assembly Member Kamillah Weber, is the new chair, and as you mentioned, Assembly Member Isaac Bryan is the new vice chair, and December 2nd, Monday, Governor Newsom, announced earlier, but December 2nd was the special session, right? That Newsom had announced to, Trump-proof California in the areas related to, civil rights, immigration, the environment, and some other issues. And I bring that up because in that special session, there were reparationists that went up to the Capitol that Monday. Held a press conference, not a protest, just a press conference, right? Calling for unity, calling for the Black Caucus members to reintroduce the bills that they had a hand in killing. Demanding to bring back the agency bill, the fund bill, the land reclamation bill. And so we'll see what happens. But I think there is some positive signs because on that day of the special session, some Black Caucus members did actually announce or introduce bills related to reparations. One of them was introduced by Assemblymember Tina McKenna that was kind of similar to a bill that Senator Bradford introduced in the past legislative session, but it would give descendants of slaves, grants to purchase homes, right? Housing assistance, right? That's a bill that was recently introduced by Tina McKenna just a couple of days ago. And then Assemblymember Isaac Bryan just introduced a bill that would give an admissions priority or would allow for Cal State universities and the UCs to give an admissions priority or preference to descendants of slaves. And so I think that what I think is really good is that at least we're seeing these legislators not being afraid to introduce bills that are narrowly tailored to descendants of slaves. I think that was a concern from some community members where we weren't sure exactly kind of how committed, our legislators were to introducing bills specifically to the specific group. So it's great to see that, there's already been 2 bills that are targeted to that group. And so we just have to, just go from here. CJEC, which is a grassroots organization, they're having a reparations education and advocacy day, January 7th. So the plan is to bring at least 50 or so folks up to the Capitol to meet with every single assembly member and senator. So not only the Black Caucus, but all of the state legislature, to really hammer home the importance and the significance of passing reparations legislation. So I hope this is not a roundabout answer. To be quite honest, I have not had any personal conversations with any of the Black Caucus members. I mean, that may or may not be a good thing. I don't know. We'll see. But from what I'm observed,
I think we don't listen. We're citizens out here. We see what we see. We're just talking about it here, and that's how that's what makes this very, very rich. We're not really we're trying to understand, and hopefully those of us that are watching this or might hear this, it gives them some food for thought. I mean, because at the end of the day, right, it all comes down to the people in every situation, and our people can't be informed. And this brings me to my next question is just really thinking out loud. Like there's some of us who listen. We saw this during the election. There's some folks who are staunchly Republican or whatever. That's how they voted. They have their very super conservative ways in our community. We're not a monolith, so there are those who might say we don't need no reparations.
Mm-hmm.
why is the reparations discussion so important in this present day and time, in your opinion? And what does reparations look like? Am I getting a check, or what's going on? And then the last part of that question is, okay, once I get my check or whatever the reparations is manifests itself as, what then? Where do we go from there?
Right. Well, I've come into the reparations discourse kind of from an international law perspective. That's what I studied. I studied reparations, human rights under international law in law school. And so I always kind of, impart some knowledge from that vantage point in terms of what reparations is under international law. And under international law, yes, reparations is about compensation. It's about a check. There's also other components of reparations as well, like rehabilitation, right? So practically speaking, that could look like, free healthcare for descendants of slaves from cradle to grave, right? Free education from cradle to grave, right? Fully covered college tuition, right? That was one of the recommendations from the task force. Restitution, right? That's another form of reparations under international law. So that, can look like, some the bills that we've already seen that haven't necessarily been passed, like the land reclamation bill, right? Getting land back that was unjustly taken from you by the state, right? That's a form of reparations. Satisfaction, I argue we've already seen reparations in the form of satisfaction a lot. Satisfaction being a formal apology is an example, right? That was one of the bills that passed the state legislature that Newsom signed this past fall, a formal apology on behalf of the state of California to descendants of slaves. That could also look like the taking down of Confederate monuments, the renaming of street names, things like that. And then last but not least, under international law, guarantees of non-repetition. That's like kind of the fifth form or element of reparations. And that looks at more structural institutional policy change. And that's why that agency, this, the Freedmen Affairs Agency, this Reparations Office Agency, is really kind of a North Star, because it really gets at, securing that, guarantees of non-repetition. How do you get the state to guarantee to stop harming the victim group? Well, having like a specific permanent agency that's tasked with providing direct services to this group, but also tasked with being a watchdog over other agencies and entities to make sure that this group's rights and privileges and immunities aren't being abridged or violated. So, in all, I wanted to share that under international law, reparations is compensation, restitution, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and guarantees of non-repetition. I kind of forgot the last part of your question.
I was going to ask, okay, once we get our check there, what then now? What do you think Black folks, like after it's over, then what?
Yeah, well, and we still haven't seen a direct cash payments bill be introduced just yet by anyone in the state legislature. And so hopefully that happens soon. But like you said, once we get that check or, that material benefit, what should we do? And my personal opinion is that we should build, right? We should build internally, build each other up, structurally, emotionally, psychologically, financially, just really be intentional about protecting and building, our own communities. And we've done it before. Interestingly enough, when people talk about Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, people talk about it from like a Black capitalist perspective. Like, these were Black folks who pulled themselves up by the bootstraps and, created their own cities and things like that, which is true to a certain extent. But a lot of people don't know that the Black people who were concentrated in Tulsa, who created Black Wall Street, they were descendants of Indian freedmen. So they were descendants of enslaved Africans who were actually owned by Native Americans who were removed from the South during the Trail of Tears and had to go up to Tulsa, Oklahoma. And so they brought their enslaved Africans with them. After, slavery was deemed abolished, not only in the United States, but in Indian territory as well. Ironically enough, you have the U.S. government kind of forcing the hands of Indian leaders and forcing the Indian leaders to give reparations to their ex-slaves. So even though the American government never gave its slaves reparations, the American government did force certain Indian tribes to give so-called reparations to slaves who were owned by Indians. And so I say all that to say, the Black people who created Black Wall Street, that land was given to them by their ex-enslavers in Indian territory, right? And that land was valuable because it had oil and everything on it. So I say all that to say that Tulsa, Black Wall Street isn't necessarily a story of Black capitalism as much as it is with what happens when a group gets reparations via land and other benefits as well. They built up, this thriving, booming economy and community. Unfortunately, it was bombed, right, by white folks, and it was allowed by the American government. But I say all that to say that is an example. We have the blueprint for what is possible when we get reparations. And the last thing I'll say is reparations, to me, it's about rectifying decades, if not centuries and centuries, of exclusionary public policy. Reparations is a public policy issue. It's been deemed a serious public policy issue for other groups, like Japanese American internment camp survivors, like victims of war crimes in Guam, like Holocaust survivors and their descendants. But it's never been seen as a viable public policy issue for African Americans because of anti-Blackness, because of casteism, so many different racism, because of so many different things. It's only now in the past 10, 20 years, maybe you could say 30 years even, where it's starting to become a more viable, a serious policy issue for African Americans. And so, again, reparations is about rectifying centuries of exclusionary public policy, starting with and by exclusionary public policy, exclusionary in the sense that there's so many examples of public policy that has excluded African Americans from being able to build wealth in this country, right? Which has led to this extraordinary racial wealth gap, which would take at this present moment, without reparations, without government intervention, over 228 years to close. Slavery, right? That was an instance of exclusionary public policy, right? We had to slave and work forcibly 18, 24-hour days. Right, that's one of the main examples for which reparations is important and necessary. But then even after slavery, you have the GI Bill, right? Excluded Black veterans from benefits. You had, redlining. You had, racially restrictive covenants that restricted the ways, the places in which African Americans could live and, buy property and build wealth in that sense. And so, there's so many different policies we can pinpoint from slavery to now that excluded us from being able to build wealth, and it was sanctioned by all levels of government, local, state, and federal. And so that's what reparations in a crux is about. It's about rectifying that history of exclusion.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. The Oklahoma section of our country in Tulsa, there's a whole rich history of just what you described there. We'll have to come back on and dig into that deeper, so I can share with you my little journey on how I discovered that nuggets of the history you're talking about. It's pretty interesting. Has to do with, I was researching the origins of a local bank.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but I'm so glad to hear your background in international law. And as you're speaking now, and now that I know that, I can go ahead and talk. I want to ask you, this is sort of in the reparations area, right? As masses of the people who are formerly subjugated are seeking remedy against their colonizers, slave masters, or whatever. And now we're seeing in real time the French government is collapsing. And I know that there have been many academics and intellectuals, Black academics and intellectuals, that when they describe how there's 14 African nations through the continental franc system, the CFA system, their economies are tied to the French economy. The French control the economy of these African nations. And it has been said many times, I've heard personally, where they said if those countries began to rebel against the CFA system and began to expel the French out of their countries and remove the post-colonial control that the French have on those nations, then we would see a virtual collapse of the French government and their economic systems. And that's what we're seeing right now in real time. If you go back to what was happening in Niger, right, we were seeing in our headlines as if it was this, military coup and, the rebels, and they framed it as a bad thing in our news media. But upon closer examination of the story, one would notice that, okay, what this is Black folks rejecting the narrative of colonialism, the control, said, no, we need a new thing happening. Get your military out of here, get your embassies out of here. We're about to get rid of this money so we can form our own currency and have economic unity with our neighbors right in the region. And when I started seeing that happening in the headlines, and now yesterday and this morning, seeing that their government is collapsing and economic uncertainty happening right there in France. When you look at that just on face value with your mindset and perspective of international law and what we're talking about, reparations, right? What is your immediate thought as you watch that story unfold?
Well, when I was in law school, I studied abroad at the University of Amsterdam, and I got a Master of Laws in International Criminal Law. And that's where I wrote a thesis on global reparatory justice for people of African descent. I'm mainly focused on the Western Hemisphere in my thesis, just talking about Black Americans, but also Black Brazilians and Black Colombians, kind of connecting the dots and kind of making similarities about our experiences. But at the same time, right, I understand that there is the need for global reparatory justice, not only for enslavement, right, of folks in the Americas, but for colonialism and the lingering effects of colonialism in African nations today. And I know Biden was just over in Angola the other day as well, stating that he wanted to give money to the country for the issues it's having with the environment, but can connect all those dots to colonialism, essentially in terms of the harms, but particularly to your point, the economic harms that Africans are enduring in the continent today. I read something this morning that said there's virtually no African middle class in the continent. And the majority of people who you could say are in the middle class in Africa are in South Africa, right? And we kind of know the history of with South Africa and who's still there, and how that plays out. And so, there's a lot of issues that's going on in the continent, but I'm really proud of, a lot of many of the leaders, particularly in Mali, and other places that are trying to, essentially just, take back what's rightfully theirs in terms of just, taking, full control over their continent, particularly over their countries, against, this Western influence. So, yeah.
Kamillah, I ask you just because, one thing about us here at Beat City Radio and, Greg J, we're centered on building bridges of music, arts, and culture with Africa and African America. And the reason for that is we have a propitious opportunity with all that's happening right now to build our own global trade, commerce, networking, cultural exchange between our different views of the world. It's the time is now for nation building across the globe. And what we're seeing insert the larger picture of systems and governments and all that, we do see, you mentioned Brazil, they're part of the whole BRICS conversation, right? And if we look at South Africa, we have been to South Africa several times. And what was interesting is that when Russia and Ukraine began to go to war against one another, and the United States was busy encouraging support for Ukraine, and one of the prominent South African leaders said, "You coming to us and you want." Right? You want us to go against Russia. We're not going to go against Russia because Russia stood with us in our fight against the apartheid government, and the United States didn't. I've always held that statement to be like kind of a wow moment for they have perspective. And anyways, I just say all that to say we operate trips too. I'd love to invite you to our next trip to Ghana here, which is in July. We leave July 27th, 2025. So put that on your calendar. I'll send you the info.
Okay, I'm writing it down now.
Yes. Because it's interesting, and I think we do need to take the time as a people just to, yes, all politics, all of these perspectives are local, but also take a step back and look at our history across the nation, and then the history globally of us as a people. This melanin carries a weight of struggle for us to be free, and we just need to understand what's happening across the globe. Yeah.
Wow,
Let me ask you, so in this new day, you sound optimistic.
I am. Yes, I am. That doesn't mean there won't be any shenanigans. I don't know. I'm a realist, so shenanigans may pop up, but overall, I am very optimistic for sure.
So you mentioned, were you saying Dr. Weber is now the chairperson?
Yes.
Oh, that's a good thing.
Yes.
Okay, that's a good thing. I'm one of her students at San Diego State.
Her daughter is the chair of the.
Oh, her daughter. Oh, nice. Okay, very good. Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay, I don't know. I missed that detail. Okay, that's a good deal. I hope that they get it together.
Yeah.
And because it was painful for me to watch. I don't know how about other folks to felt as I watched you. I watched the organization CJEC, and I participate in a lot of media briefings about the task force. I downloaded the skillion page document, and it hurt me to my core to see. And I highly, highly, highly respect Senator Steve Bradford. So my questions were really coming from the heart. Is like, first of all, how y'all gonna do my boy like that, right? And then the whole thing is like, what happened? Because we weren't getting the information of, like, so we could understand. Okay, how did this really happen? And it looked like our Black caucus, our Black political leaders, it was like on the street, it's just like, dang, we can't even get together on reparations.
Right.
So it's very, very deflating. So now that we go into this new period, I'm just hoping, I too am optimistic. And for you, someone who's, got floor seats to the situation, you actually one of the referees out there, one of the coaches of the movement here. To hear you say that you're optimistic is really, really a good thing. And I salute you very much.
Thank you. And I salute you as well. Thank you so much for your support and, just keeping your ear to the ground and just being so grounded to the community, bringing these conversations to the community. It's just extremely important. Let's just continue the conversation. Let's continue to build.
Yes, thank you. So now you got to wait till after. When do they come back after this? I know they have the legislature. When do they come back?
So they come back officially January 6th.
January 6th, yeah.
And as I mentioned during the interview, earlier in the interview, CJEC, which is a grassroots organization that works on reparations, they're doing a Reparations Education and Advocacy Day on January 7th, so the day after the legislatures come back. And they're pretty much going to bus people up from LA, from all across the state of California, to go to the state capitol January 7th and to have like meet and greets with each legislator in the state assembly and the state senate, like legislative visits, about reparations. So if folks are interested, I would say, look up CJEC on Instagram or online and can sign up to be a part of that caravan to go to the state capitol January 7th.
Yeah, this is very interesting. Let's talk about this for a minute before we go. I have participated in advocacies like that for arts and culture. I had put my arts and culture hat on. I'm the immediate past board president of the Arts Council for Long Beach, and we are very active in advocating for arts funding, whether it's for the schools, for artists, for venues. We're just in the game. And we linked up with advocacy organization Californians for the Arts. I've done 3 of these thus far, where we went up to Sacramento, and we had our little, reception on the lawn of the state capitol, and then we were organized. It was very, very much strategic with how we did it. But, you're talking about 300 to 400 arts professionals participating in this activity. And we went, we were assigned to teams, set the appointments with the different legislators, and we walked through that office building. We sat down with the legislators or their chiefs of staff or whatever, and talked about what we needed for arts and culture, where there was certain bills that were stalled in Senate, or things that we needed to happen with regard to arts and culture. And I have to tell you that it's very, very effective. And as the latest news is that, let's face it, post-pandemic, they gave out a lot of money and support and relief, and now the state is suffering. They're at a budget crunch, right? So they had projected several $1 million of cuts in the arts and culture sector, and through our advocacy, we were able to recover 75% of what they originally said that they were going to cut. And so I say all that to say, the activity that CJEC that you're describing, that strategy can be very, very effective. And that's what it takes, is for advocacy groups to get up there on state capitol. It's our place. It doesn't belong to the politicians. It belongs to the people. So you can go up there, organize, knock on their doors. They're going to see you. You know what I'm saying? They ain't going to say no. So, you get up in there and you state your case, and voila, things can happen.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, as I mentioned, I said 50, but we really need, over 100 people to come with us. To your point, you say y'all had 300, 400 people. Y'all was, that's what we need. And I would love to get with you offline. Maybe you can help support us in that, since you've done it before. I know that people who I'm working with in CJEC would love to learn more from me on that front as well.
It would be my pleasure.
Yay. Okay.
Yay. All right. Kamillah, listen, give the people how we can get a hold of you, what's next for you, and what are your parting shots?
Yeah. Well, yes. You can follow me on social media platforms, Kamillah V Moore. That's V as in Victoria. So KAMILAH V MOORE. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Facebook. I also have a website, KamillahMoore.com. I have a contact page. Folks can get in contact with me that way as well. And what's next for me? I'm currently an attorney, as you know. I'm working for a civil rights firm, so I'm keeping busy, with my day job. But when I'm not, I'm doing that. I'm using my free time as much as I can to continue to spread the gospel about, reparations and why it's important, not only in this state, but, nationwide and globally as well for people of African descent. And so stay tuned. I have a little bit more plans that still have to be crystallized in that front, but, I'm committed to continuing to, at least in California for sure, continue to hold the legislator as accountable to make sure that those over 100, 150 final recommendations from the task force, right? In that 1,100-page final report, we had over pretty much 150 final recommendations. I'm sticking to making sure that those policies get introduced as legislation and eventually get passed into law. And so my parting shots is for, stay engaged.
You're doing a great work there. You're walking in the shadows of, Attorney Charles Ogletree, may he rest in peace. And these are some of the pioneers as we have this discussion and this analysis and this advocacy on reparations. It's from a national standpoint, and certainly it's interesting from a state level and even the local level. I didn't get a chance to ask you. So Attorney Areva Martin, I saw where she got some sort of reparations down there in Palm Springs. Did you know that?
Yes, I heard about that, which was absolutely amazing news. She was able to negotiate a deal that made the city of Palm Springs essentially give, I think, about like 5.6 million direct compensation or so, or 5.9 direct compensation to 200 plus survivors and descendants of the Section 14 kind of raising of land, right? Destruction of land, pushing these Black and Latino families out of that particular area to build up, commercial enterprise or whatever. And so, they're going to get direct compensation, but she also worked out a deal for the city to provide like a community housing development, like more housing for these descendants to get first dibs, also a community land trust. So it's really dynamic in terms of what came out of that. So really proud.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Mm-hmm. All right, y'all. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Us on Coffee Conversations with Greg J. Yes. All right. Thank you, Kamillah. Thank you. And keep on doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
All right. Coffee Conversations with Greg J. You can get us on our Facebook page, Coffee Conversations with Greg J. Of course, across Beach City Radio, Beach City Perspective. Go to beachcityradio.com, columbusoncoffee.com. Just type in Google search Coffee Conversations with Greg J. We also take the audio, repurpose it, and put it out there as a podcast that's available wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Spreaker, Google, Amazon, just wherever, just Spotify, go on and get it. Type in Coffee Conversations with Greg J and you'll find us there. Lastly, we're also on YouTube. We need some help there, right? Just go ahead and YouTube it and like and subscribe. That would help us out very much to get the algorithms popping, if you will. And you can go to my YouTube page, Hannibal the Radio, look at the Coffee Conversations with Greg J playlist, or search that way as a playlist. You'll find us, Coffee Conversations with Greg J. Hope everything is all good with you. Keep loving one another. That is so important. Love one another, love one another, love one another. Like the lady says, the struggle continues, but always to God be the glory. Peace and blessings.